technology, whether it's AI, IoT, whether it's a chatbot, when it comes to investing, when it comes to investing time, money, resources, it is always challenging to find more useful information. Information that can help you make your decision efficiently and effectively. And which is why in today's session, we are going to talk about 5 things that you must consider before investing into chatbots. Now, I will take you through a couple of case studies, especially two different case studies. One is coming from National Broadband Network, NBN, from Australia, where I used to consult them for almost 2 years. And another company, MTech Digital, a company from India, which is a software development company. But in both cases, they have used chatbots, automation bots, for two different purposes. NBN case study focuses on a bot that was developed internally but to serve external customers, whereas MTech's chatbot was developed internally for serving internal customers or internal employees for that matter. So both of them have different footprint, different time zones, different geographies, and different criteria and different customer bases to serve. So it will be an interesting intertwined learning experience as to how both these projects actually tell us the same story, give us the same learning. And so the first question you would want to ask when you decide to invest in a chatbot is why? Why do you want chatbot? What makes it a need? What makes you want this? In case of NBN in particular, and they were facing lots of customer complaints due to poor network issues, and number of network outages. So as that percentage was steady, their customer base was almost doubling every year. And so they anticipated that if we were to double our customer base next year, our complaints would also double. And which means we need more people in our support staff, which we cannot afford. So let's develop automation. Let's have an automated bot which can take over most of the workload. Sounds plausible, but a terrible idea. And you might have guessed it, why? Because they are trying to serve complaints using bot, which ideally shouldn't be there in first place. So when someone says, I've got to double my customer base, and so my complaints would double, there is something terribly wrong. Your complaints should be reducing. And if not, then instead of focusing on chatbot development, you should focus on reduction of complaints. So that's one of the example as to why having a right reason to develop or to invest into chatbot is highly important. On the contrary, when MTech Digital started to work on chatbot, they essentially started it earlier last year when pandemic hit. People were working from home and all that. And they started to see a large influx of requests or questions coming in from all the employees to their HR. So HR started to receive too many queries, and they were then short staffed because of the pandemic. So they had to quickly run a project to create something that would help them alleviate most of the workload. So one way you would see that if someone is developing a chatbot, someone is developing or deploying a technology for alleviating workload, improving efficiency. The other way, someone is just trying to do the patchwork. So the first learning that I want you to have today is select the right reason for your chatbot development. Now, what would be those right reasons besides serving efficiency and all that? The topmost reason always should be giving your customers the best experience possible. That should be always your primary concern. That should be always any company's primary concern. The secondary reason could be that you want to reduce non value adding activities. There are some of the activities which are completely redundant but still required, such as administrative work, such as something, a trivial question that must be answered, and they do not add a radical value in customers from customer perspective as well as from business perspective. So these are called as a non-value adding activity. Maybe for those purposes, you may want to develop a chatbot and reduce the human involvement as much as possible. And the third thing you would want to do it for is increasing efficiency. But when you're thinking about increasing efficiency, we are talking about increasing overall efficiency. It doesn't mean your company's efficiency increases at the expense of customer efficiency. You cannot have a bot sending people all over the place to find something. So, in turn, they become inefficient, but your company stays efficient. So, it has to be a win win situation where customers as well as company become more efficient. Now, one of the interesting things that we saw when these chatbots were being developed is people had this funny notion that once you develop a basic framework, the chatbot will start to learn itself. Self-learning chatbot. And by the way, if you haven't heard this story, uh, Tay chatbot, which was deployed on Twitter by Microsoft. Tay stands for thinking about you. And it was deployed in 2016. The case study is widely available on internet as well. Within 24 hours of deployment, the chatbot went from just simple basic chatbot to completely racist and Nazi, sexist, and most abusive chatbot because it was self-learning. It was just gathering the data from people's retweets and answers and messages and learning from it. The point is, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work efficiently. Self-learning chatbots is a myth. So invest your time and money into continuous learning and monitoring program because that means you are accounting for those many resources over the long run. Another interesting thing that we found, especially with the MTech's chatbot, as people started to ask questions to HR, and you could see when you have a company that has a wider footprint, a different global level footprint, employees working from different countries, such as say, if people are working from India as well as US, or maybe say in UK or Australia, then the kind of questions chatbot would receive may be the same at the fundamental level, but the way they get asked differs. To give you an example, when people started getting worried about pandemic, people wanted to know how much money they have in their savings 401k. So if US employee asks a question, he would ask, how much money is in my 401k? But at the same time, if the Indian employee has to ask, they will say, how much money is in my PF or Provident Fund? The same thing is called as a super in Australia. So when you start to develop a chatbot, you have to understand customers' lingo and cater for that context. I mean, the simplest part is somebody saying okay, okay, or K, garbage bin, trash can. So the words differ. Country wise, sometimes even within the same country, dialects differ. And that means you got to pay critical attention to customer lingo. It's one of the critical aspects that you always need to focus on when you're developing that chatbot, because if that is not done correctly, it could break the functionality. Now, another piece you would want to understand is the seasonality in your training. Because if you're training your chatbot with lots of inputs that are coming from people, it there is a chance that it would learn something and miss something out. Why is that? Because take the example of MTech again. As they started to train their chatbot during pandemic, most of the questions were all focused on the savings, on the salary side. But as you see the holiday season started, the questions changed. Questions changed towards asking more about how much leave I have, how much leave I'm entitled to, how many leaves I can borrow from next year, and things like that. So as the season changes, whether it's a natural season, whether it's an annual business season, the questions differ. And because the questions differ, your learning shifts. So you always need to understand when you're training your chatbot that whatever is coming in as a data input is not the deterministic or a final input yet. It could change. So you need to cater for that kind of a training. And so that it goes into your monitoring or complete monitoring as well as learning plan. I usually recommend you factor this seasonality and let this monitoring run for at least a one business cycle, right? And that's where the next thing comes in as to how long you should be monitoring for, because you cannot go doing that for indefinite period of time. At the same time, you cannot just quickly deploy the project and do nothing. So there has to be a sweet balance, and that balance is actually you monitor the inputs, the performance, fix the chatbot for at least one business cycle. And that business cycle could be different for different businesses. For most businesses, although the average business cycle is 1 year, so that you would see pretty much everything throughout the year, and the next year the same thing starts to repeat itself, and then it becomes routine. So you want to factor that in, which means it is going to affect your budget, it is going to affect number of resources and assets that you are going to put up for this deployment to work. Now, besides these 5 tips, I want to give you one more tip. And that probably is the best tip of all. And that tip is essentially treat your chatbot development project as a product development project, not as just a typical delivery project. And here's the reason why. Think about a typical project, a software project or an integration project, the way it is delivered through agile methodologies or something else, is you can essentially develop any module in random if they don't have dependencies and deliver that and call it a day. You could have um, sprint one, which is delivered, or the part one delivered, part five delivered, part eight delivered, then you go back to part two delivery, and vice versa. But the same thing is not possible when you're deploying or developing a product. You cannot deliver a wheel and then a month later you deliver a seat, and then a month later you deliver them other three wheels, and then almost a year later you deliver them the hood and the bonnet and everything. If you want to sell someone a car, you have to give them a full car from day one. And the same thing happens is that your bot, when you develop a chatbot, the bot cannot be half functional. It has to be at least functional for one particular activity. And then you can go both sides in developing more functionality. But at least for that one function, it has to be completely performing before you put it out to your customers, whether it's your internal customer, whether it's your external customer. So those were the 5 tips plus a bonus, where 5 things to consider when investing into chatbots. Now, if you're interested understanding more about deploying technology, emerging technologies, AI, etc., and how do you develop those technologies, deploy those projects in risk-free manner, I would recommend my book, Keeping Your AI Under Control, completely free for you to download. Go on to this link and you will have your complimentary copy available in a digital format to download. I would be happy to receive your feedback on this and appreciate your time in listening to this talk. Thank you so much.